Welcome. Yeah, very happy to be here today. This is our second video with Dr. Miles Nichols. We're doing a little preview video of our upcoming Kitchen Alchemy course. And we had a wonderful talk in our first video about the benefits and possibilities of working with a dietary approach to intervention and supporting clients, especially those who are in complicated conditions, but also those who are just looking to make a change in their life for the benefit, positive. Maybe they've tried diets that haven't worked, or they think they're doing all right with diet. They're not getting the results they would like to. And that's where this brilliant interventions can come into play here. And so welcome, Miles. I see you're there on your treadmill.
Yep.
Yep. Taking your stroll.
Yeah. Got to lead by example and make sure to keep getting movement in throughout the day, which, like nutrition, movement, of course, is one of the pillars for health.
Yes.
Sit too much time in front of a computer without movement. So we're getting movement while we're doing the interview here.
Nice. Nice. I am grateful for the shiatsu practice that I have because it's a movement-based practice.
Yeah.
Meditation-based movement practice. So when I'm seeing clients all day, I'm basically in a moving meditation all day long, which is really sweet. I'm grateful.
That is.
And
yes.
And actually, I get to sit on a cushion for this interview, so I get to be still.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Good.
Beautiful. So what are some other points that we made in that first interview that you'd like to just kind of refresh?
Well, one of the things is just that today we live in a world where there's a lot of information available. It's easy to come by. You can look online and gather information about all sorts of diets, but the clinical application of that information for an individual in a customized fashion is a huge art, and I've learned through clinical practice of working with complex chronic diseases that I haven't been able to find online, that hasn't been stuff that it's stuff that comes with clinical experience. And I think that it's important people really understand that just gathering information about a new diet online doesn't work for all people. Different diets are good for different people at different times, and those diets change. So that's one of the points I want to emphasize from last time, is that it's really important to understand a variety of different perspectives on nutrition, and to be able to understand that what works for you won't necessarily be what works for your clients if you're working with clients. Mm-hmm. And what works for you today might not be the same as what's going to work for you 3 months from now, or a year or 2 years from now. So having that understanding helps to be able to know a little bit more about the difference between just information, just learning about diets, and the actual utility, the actual ability to apply and make a difference by having a more thorough understanding for a systematic step-by-step approach for actually uncovering what is a diet that's going to promote health and wellness and longevity for you and or your clients.
Right. And I was struck by your mentioning that you have about maybe 12 different diets that you'll actually work with in your practice, and nothing is ever dogmatic.
Right. Yeah. I'm interested in what works, and what works happens to be different for different people. And that just means that I need as many tools available and an open mind to try different things out at different times. And over time, I've developed some favorites for things that help often with certain conditions. And I definitely am completely open-minded about what kinds of diets I'm using, and am always actually integrating even new diets in to try them out and see what works. And then we keep what works and let go of what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I'm reminded of forgive me, but the Ayurvedic method I went to an Ayurvedic practitioner a while back, and it was interesting to me that for me, almost none of the dietary suggestions she made really worked.
Right. Yeah.
And as much as I honor the Ayurvedic tradition and the gems of wisdom that it contains, I felt a little bit constrained by their doshic only approach. And
Yeah.
I found myself a little bit reactive to the suggestions.
Yeah. 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 And, one thing I want to have people walk away with who are watching this is an understanding that there's a big difference between a therapeutic diet and a maintenance diet. And it's really important to understand that if there's chronic illness or if there are health objectives in mind, that there may be a therapeutic dietary approach which is a little bit more restrictive for a fixed period of time as health is being recovered. And then that's going to be very, very different than a maintenance diet. Like in the clinic, when we're working with patients, I'm interested in having a period of a therapeutic diet that's highly restrictive as a person's overcoming complex chronic disease, and then gradually transitioning them to a more varied maintenance diet where their system is resilient and robust and they can handle more foods and things aren't going to throw them so much for a loop, but it, of course, healthy still, just interested in being able to actually sustain and maintain that for the long run. Because I think a lot of people get some success on a therapeutic diet that's very restrictive, but if they try and stay on that for years after year, it becomes it actually sometimes causes more problems. People socially sometimes aren't, are alienating themselves from gatherings or people that would be good for them to bond and connect socially. But if the diet is too restrictive for too long a period of time, there are big social impacts.
Yes.
There's a piece of research that came out recently showing that social isolation is as big a risk factor for disease as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. And I think this is often overlooked in the health community, that not only is the diet and nutritional dimension itself important, but what are the social implications of that? What are the psychological implications of being excessively rigid for a long period of time? And what do people do internally in their brain around stressing about food and stressing about where it came from and stressing about cross-contamination? These are real issues. Cross-contamination is a real issue, and pesticide exposure is a real issue, and toxin exposure is a real issue. But how do we understand and recognize those issues, doing our best to maintain a clean diet while also understanding that the way that we relate to the diet, the way that we relate to food is also important and can also cause its own issues? And how can we come to terms with that? That's a very interesting question that I want people to explore, and that, it's a continual ongoing inquiry for myself of,
yes,
in terms of restriction, in terms of cleanliness in diet and how we relate to food. That's all a big question, and it's all connected, and it needs to be a bigger consideration than simply what to eat.
Right. I remember I was on the macrobiotic diet, and I was quite strict with it when I first found it, and it actually helped me a lot. There was a lot of revitalization that happened in my body as my diet got cleaner. And then I got an employment position. I worked at the Lyric Opera of Chicago as an assistant stage manager. And opening night for there was the 32nd season. And there we are, opening night, and they're passing around champagne. And I refused champagne.
Yeah.
And I was ostracized for the remainder of my tenure at the Opera House. I had committed the greatest social faux pas ever of not accepting. I could have taken a glass and toasted with them and then not drank it, and nobody would have noticed. But instead, I had to make a point that I was clean.
Right. Yeah.
And then I was out. I was the guy who ate beige food from then on.
Right. Yeah.
So just a kind of a personal antidote about that. And so.
Yeah, yeah. And so diet and nutrition is more than just about what people are eating. How are they relating to, and mindful eating is a big topic. Food hygiene is a big topic. The cephalic phase of digestion, of just when we're thinking about smelling food before we even intake it, is a big topic. So there's much more than simply the foods themselves. And even within what a person's eating, the way that it's prepared and how, like, for example, this is something I really want to share with people, because one specific example is that people really appreciate the antimicrobial components in garlic, right? I think a lot of us know that, hey, garlic has these antimicrobial components to it that are very valuable. And so a lot of us want to take in garlic, but then there's this problem with garlic and its antimicrobial component, which is called allicin. And allicin, unfortunately, isn't created if you just crush garlic, or if you just cut it up and immediately throw it in a pan and cook with it, you've actually destroyed an enzyme that reacts with a constituent called allin that creates that allicin that's the antimicrobial component. So yes, it'll flavor your food, but you're losing some of that potential for intaking a phytonutrient that's highly antimicrobial and that can be a really beneficial thing. So some people, to get around this, they try to have raw garlic. Now, raw garlic is something to very unpleasant for most people to consume raw garlic. So people try and do different things, like they try and make their fire cider, and they cut up the raw garlic and put it in with vinegar and things, or they try and make creative ways to eat raw garlic. But when you really look at the research, what's interesting is that there have been some research papers that have shown that if you simply crush garlic, and if you let that garlic sit on the cutting board for about 10 minutes, when you crush it, the allin and that heat-sensitive enzyme mix. They're stored in separate parts of the clove, but when it's crushed, they mix. And over that 10 minutes on the cutting board, they create a reaction that creates allicin, which is that antimicrobial phytonutrient. And that is actually heat resistant. So you can cook with that garlic that's already had the reaction to create the allicin, and you can get the antimicrobial constituent. Whereas if you had simply cooked immediately with it, like most people do, you would have destroyed the enzyme that had to have the reaction, and it wouldn't have had time to have that reaction. And now all of a sudden, just one small change of letting that garlic sit on the cutting board for 10 minutes, eating the same food, now you've actually increased your nutrient absorption, because you've understood a principle that most people don't understand, which is how to maximize the phytonutrients from the food that you're eating. And there's all sorts of little things like that that most people aren't aware of, that they could do with the same things that they're eating and get so much more out of them.
So the way you prepare something makes a big difference.
It does. It does. And there's a lot of confusion out there also about nutrient density, because people think, oh, if it's a nutrient dense food, that's really, really good. A lot of people don't factor in bioavailability, right? Because if something's nutrient dense, but you really absorb it, and this is true for a lot of nuts and seeds and things like that, because there's a thing called phytate in nuts and seeds, which for a seed, that's a good thing. It binds up the nutrients so that that seed holds onto those nutrients until it's ready to sprout. And then when it's ready to sprout, it lets those nutrients out. But in the human digestive tract, that phytate can actually inhibit digestion of some of the minerals. So for example, a lot of people say, hey, I'm going to get my zinc from pumpkin seeds. Which you can get some, but that phytate binds up that zinc. So even though there's X amount of zinc in a third of a cup of pumpkin seeds, the amount that you're going to absorb, the amount that's bioavailable, is much less. unless you sprout them first or get sprouted pumpkin seeds, in which case the phytate dramatically lowers. The nutrient density is the same, but the bioavailability increases. So now you're able to actually absorb more of what's in it. So, you know, again, these kinds of considerations, yeah, are things that so many people overlook.
Right. So simple little tweaks can create so much more bioavailability and nutrient density. The internet here is a little, my internet connection is unstable. Yeah. So I cut out. Yeah. So what I'll just repeat, it's just like nutrient density can be increased and bioavailability can be increased by just simple little tweaks, little things you can do that will make a big difference.
And they're not always intuitive. Like blueberries, for example, the phytonutrients in blueberries become more bioavailable when you cook them. People would think, oh, let's have raw blueberries. They'll be more bioavailable that way. But actually, if you get canned blueberries that have been, you know, there's a cooking process in that canning, you actually get more bioavailable nutrients. It just seems so weird. Or if you take your fresh blueberries and you cook them, then you're actually going to have more capacity to absorb that phytonutrient. But sometimes it's the opposite. And sometimes cooking reduces the phytonutrients for some foods. So it's not always intuitive.
Right.
Which is why we need research looking at these kinds of things when we have it.
Right. And so there's obviously such an immense amount of material here. There's so many foods and so many different ways to prepare them. What are some of your, like, if you will, shortcuts or cheat sheets, or do you have like lists and lists of things, or how do you, I mean, I know you work with people individually, but how would you recommend like a therapist who's wanting to add a little more nutritional knowledge into their lexicon, into their ability to serve their clients? What's the kind of pathway to get that information practical and in their practice?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, I think number one is simply to have an understanding of different dietary approaches, pros and cons with different kinds of people. And that, unfortunately, I don't know of a clear resource that's easily come by for people to get that information, which is part of why we're doing this training for people, is because there's not a great resource for that. But you know, I'll say that simply putting it into practice and really testing things out, and in my practice we get to test through labs, which is great because we actually get feedback on how markers are changing, like blood sugar markers, metabolism markers, hormone markers, things like that. So we get a lot of valuable information. If you're a clinician but you can't get that information, then, you know, come draw on our experience and what we've gotten from that kind of information. But at least you can get some information from symptom changes, or you can do questionnaires, you can implement questionnaires. But, you know, have some way to measure the progress. Because if you don't have a way to measure the progress, it's going to be really hard for you to know what's working and what's not working.
Yeah.
So questionnaires,
You can't fix what you can't measure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you'll be shooting in the dark and, you know, full of bias. And so it's much, much better if you can find a way to measure, have some, you know, standardized questionnaires that people repeat on multiple occasions at a minimum. And if you can, take a look at some labs, or have them, you know, go, if you're not a doctor, have them go to their doctor and run some labs. You can, you know, track your progress through a combination of questionnaires, of conversation, of labs. And tracking progress is going to be one of the best ways to learn what works and what doesn't work.
One of the things we like to work with is the SUDS scale, the subjective unit of distress.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, I mean, this is true in the psychotherapeutic professions, obviously, but in body work, particularly, or in coaching work, we're always working with that scale of 1 to 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, how distressing is this for you? Is it mildly distressing? Is it extremely distressing? Or is it not distressing at all? And so you can track that. And then dietary interventions will also be able to be kind of their reactions to different food choices or different preparation methods would be able to be tracked with a similar type of scale.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can track them that way and start to see what's working better than other things for which kinds of people. And, you know, it takes a while, but it's well worth doing that, especially if you're a clinician seeing clients. And then for yourself, it's well worth doing it for your own nutritional explorations of seeing how you're personally evolving and growing in your own health and vibrancy and vitality as you're making dietary changes. And
Right.
you know, for me personally, I make dietary changes and I run labs and I see how things change. And you know, I always have goals and I'm working towards different changes to increase my energy levels or to work on getting certain markers to be improved. And I suggest that kind of thing for people to continually have this, how can I improve and make better my life, my energy, my enjoyment, my social connections. And it's a balancing act, but if you have a method for tracking it, if you have some capacity to measure it, that's going to go a long way. Because, you know, let's face it, we like to create stories about that what we're doing. We like to justify things that we're doing. So having some method for tracking can really improve our outcomes for working with ourselves and for working with clients.
Now, when you refer to like types of people, which is a wonderful, wonderful clinical tool. Will you work with like 5-element typing, meridian, organ network, things like fiery types or earthy types or metal types? Or is there some typology that you kind of draw from? Is it in your pulse diagnosis or?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite typology is 5-element typology, and that's the one that I primarily draw on in terms of my understanding and where I feel most confident. I also will combine that with some understandings about metabolism and blood sugar and hormone regulation, because there are certain, you know, people who have hormone issues, let's say thyroid hormone issues or adrenal hormone issues, tend to need a little bit more carbohydrate than someone with metabolic issues like high blood sugar. So I combine that understanding of looking at metabolism, looking at hormone function, and that's simple. Like, you don't have to be a doctor to know that. A lot of people will know if they're pre-diabetic or if they're diabetic or if they have some metabolic issue. And a lot of people will know if they have a thyroid condition or if, you know, there are some simple signs that you can look for to know if, you know, hormone issues are going on. And then that'll play into steering people in one direction versus another in terms of the dietary approach. So so I'm primarily using 5-element combined with looking at things like blood sugar, metabolism, and hormone issues.
And so for a practitioner who's not a medical doctor or who does not have access to labs and such, would you recommend that they kind of work in concert with a doctor to get information?
Yeah, it's really nice if you can work in concert with a doctor, or if you can simply ask the person to go to their primary care doctor and order some basic hormone and blood sugar labs. Most doctors are happy to order those things, and that can give you a sense for what's going on. It's usually covered by insurance. It's very simple to order a panel that's looking at something like cholesterol, thyroid hormone, and something like blood sugar markers like hemoglobin A1C and fasting glucose. Almost any doctor is willing to order those multiple times a year. It's almost always covered by insurance if someone has decent insurance. And so that's a very easy thing to do and to ask people to do, even if you're not a practitioner yourself. And then you can get a sense for from them based on whether they have any issues on those labs.
Right. And then if you could also do that for yourself.
Absolutely.
And then
Absolutely.
Work with the dietary intervention and transition, and then go back and get another set of panels and see if they've changed.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I do for myself multiple times every year is I check my blood, I see how I'm doing, I tweak, edit, hone, and refine everything, including diet and lifestyle and and
I
supplements.
will
And then,
take it in my blood. I can get over it though. It's
yeah,
not such a big deal.
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's just one perspective, and also looking at symptoms, also looking at signs of, you know, whether issues are worse or better. That's easy to do as well.
Right. I've noticed for myself that, for instance, hydration is really a really quick thing for me, especially when my mood starts to depress. If I start to get a little down on the cyclothymic level, you know, my mood is going toward a low ebb. I'll drink
Yep.
a tall glass of water or two sometimes, and then within 20 minutes, I'm more vital. I'm more fresh. It's
Yeah.
kind of like I started to wilt, like
Yeah.
my house plants. If I don't water my house plants, they wilt, and they tell me they're thirsty. Uh,
Yep.
I think that like a depressive feeling or a mood affect depression on my scale is a sign for me that I'm wilting. I'm dehydrated, and so
Hmm.
adding in proper hydration that I can assimilate will lift and elevate my mood.
Yeah, and that's helpful to know about yourself. So, you know, I think I want to leave people off today just with a couple of the problems
Yeah.
that, that with dietary approaches that I see, because, you know, there are some problems that are rampant, of course, in the conventional medical model. There's some very old research that's been debunked that's still being perpetuated. There was a big turn, you know, in the obesity epidemic. It actually started to get dramatically worse around 1980 when the dietary guidelines came out from, you know, some of the research about cholesterol, and when there was the emphasis on low fat,
Yes.
uh, you know, whole grains being emphasized and fat being demonized and saturated fat being demonized. That's actually a turning point if you look at the trajectory for obesity rates. That really was a turning point that made them dramatically worse, increasing at a much more dramatic level. So there are some serious issues with, and since some research has come out showing that saturated fat on average, actually, it does increase cholesterol a little bit, but it does not increase the heart disease risk, which is really the end reason why you would want to avoid it. Is, you know, they assumed that if cholesterol went up, it would increase heart disease risk, but that was a wrong assumption. And research now has shown that it does not increase cardiovascular disease risk on average for most people. So then we have the flip side, the problem in the, you know, alternative medicine and complementary medicine community, where a lot of these people have said, hey, the cholesterol myth is totally wrong and everyone should eat tons of saturated fat and, you know, not worry about that, and plenty of cholesterol. And I do agree with that for most people, but there's a subset of people who are hyper responders to saturated fat who actually do have increased risk as a result. And I see this on labs, and I cringe when there's these generalized, you know, it's this kind of generalized advice that's not being customized to the individual gets people into problems. And it's not just the conventional medical community that's to blame. It's also integrative and alternative medical communities who tend to get on bandwagons and say that one dietary approach is the correct dietary approach or the best thing for everyone. And that's going to get people into trouble. And so to really round that out and have a balanced view, we need to understand bioindividuality, and we need to understand that each person is unique, and that the dietary approach that works for us may not work for them, and that the dietary approach that works for them now may not be the same as in the long run. So there's some big problems with dietary approaches, not only in conventional medicine, but even in alternative and complementary medicine. And that's why I think that, you know, people even who have read some of the research and have, you know, gone away from the standard American diet and towards a more whole foods diet or a plant-based diet or a paleo diet or any of those things can still gain enormous value from the course we're putting together here, because we're not going to be dogmatic about one dietary approach. And we're going to talk about when the dietary guidelines for reducing saturated fat are appropriate, and they are sometimes appropriate.
Right.
And for some people, I'm saying avoid coconut oil, even though for most people, I'm saying eat more coconut oil.
Right.
But you can't be dogmatic, or else you're going to miss and actually cause harm to some people.
Right.
And so that's really, really important. And I want people to understand that, you know, for example, there are hyper responders to saturated fat where I'm saying avoid coconut oil and avoid butter, even if it's grass fed, and avoid ghee, and focus on olive oil and focus on monounsaturated fats like olive oil and macadamia nuts or macadamia nut oil and avocado oil as their fat choices. But that's a minority. So but you know, people need to understand that. So I just want to give that as an example so people understand some of the problems, both on the conventional dietary guidelines and on the alternative and complementary dietary guidelines.
Right. Very important to get that specificity and individualization.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Test it and check it, and then watch for markers that can point you in a certain direction.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, you know, be open-minded and be willing to do different things with different people and change things and admit that you were wrong when things aren't working and keep changing things. And, you know, I've put people on a diet that I thought was going to be best for them, and then their cholesterol markers skyrocket, and their cardiovascular disease risk markers have increased. And I say, whoa, we got it wrong. Let's switch it up, you know, and let's change these kinds of fats for you. So we need to be humble too in our approach. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. So a practitioner would be considering, or an individual who would be considering joining us for these 4 days, I'm trying to structure a question here, which would be both incentive and or what their objection might be to it. Why would they put their energy into their time and their money and their resource into spending 4 days in the classroom with us?
Sure. Well, you know, I think this is certainly not for someone who's really dogmatic in their dietary approach and unwilling to change that dogma. I'd actually recommend those people don't join for the course, because it will require an open mind, and it will require you to set aside some beliefs you've had previously and to have an open mind to trialing some things that may be new and different for you, because that's important. If you are open-minded, if you're the kind of person who loves learning and loves learning things that can be impactful and that are results driven, that are really looking to get results for yourself and for clients, then I do encourage you to come, and that this will be an enormous investment. I mean, to come and see me in the clinic is $600 an hour, and to do practitioner work one-on-one is $1,000 an hour. And it's an enormous value that you're getting. I'm not doing this for the money, that's for sure. This is really, for me, a passion. The compensation for me is going to be nowhere close to what I could do in the clinic one-on-one with clients, but I love working with groups. I love helping practitioners in particular, because I know that if I help you, you might help hundreds or thousands of other people. That's important to me. So if you're the kind of person who you want to pay it forward and you want to pass things along to your family and to your clients, and you're results driven and you want to get better results in your clinical practice, then, you know, you'd be completely missing out if you didn't jump on this immediately. This is really an enormous value. I don't know if it's going to happen again. You know, I have a very busy schedule, so, you know, I'm here, I'm dedicated to doing this time, and I really want to serve you guys. And so please show up and come and experience this, because I really do believe this is going to be of help to you and to your clients. Right
on. Yeah, well, we're looking forward to it. We're so excited, and I'm working to get the word out as best I can. And we're going to take this interview and get it out on email threads and on the Facebook, social media places, and post it up on YouTube. And so your website is Living Love Mindfulness Medicine?
That's the name of the business, is Living Love Mindfulness Medicine. The website is livinglovecommunity.com.
Excellent.
And we also have a site for practitioners called mindfulness-medicine.com. It's a little more geared towards doctors, but also nutritionists and other clinicians may get some value out of that. So mindfulness-medicine.com for practitioners and livinglovecommunity.com for the general public.
Excellent. Excellent. And then our program is the Heart Mind Shiatsu training program, but this course is going to be open to the community. It's not just for students in our program. The students in our program are studying their Chinese medicine. They're studying their 5 elements and their 12 meridians, and we're going to be moving on into extraordinary vessel work as well. So it's a pretty thorough education in the energetic matrix of the body from Chinese medicine. But that is not a prerequisite for this course with Miles. That just happens to be what my students are focused on in their shiatsu training. And this course is being sponsored by the Heart Mind Shiatsu training, and it's one of our modules. And happy to share information about the shiatsu training if that is of interest to you. But this module stands alone. And the registration for this is on our heartmindbodywork.com website. And so I'll be helping people find that in the comments sections as well. But we're open at this point to inviting you to ask questions. Put some comments in the comment thread. If you have some particular issues that you've been dealing with, either personally with diet or with your clients, with what might be going on with them. If you have questions for Dr. Michael, Dr. Miles Nichols, Dr. Michael, I'm working on that. Do you prefer Dr. Miles, Dr. Nichols, or just Miles? Or
I prefer Dr. Miles. Don't need the formality of the last name.
Oh, right on. Dr. Miles. I like it. That's great. I remember before you were a doctor.
Yep.
Really acknowledge you for the great work you've done in developing that skill set and working with your clients like you do. I'm really impressed and grateful that you're joining us for this module.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it and looking forward to serving and supporting clinicians and the general public alike and understanding more about nutrition and how to take a step-by-step approach to finding that dietary intervention that's just going to actually deliver and produce results for you and for your clients.
Right, that's essential, and not trigger you too much. I studied with Paul Pitchford for a couple of years, and he used to say that asking someone to change their diet is more difficult than asking them to change their religion or their politics.
Yeah, it gets tricky, and that's why I said if you're too dogmatic, might not be the right course for you. So, but if you have an open mind, even if you have a strong set of beliefs, if you have an open mind, then please do come. I think you'll get a lot of value.
Yeah, and you can get so much value from just simple little changes that can make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today, and we'll get this posted up, and I'll let you know if any questions or comments come through that we want your response to. Okay?
Fantastic. Thanks, Matthew, and have a great one.
Great. We'll be in touch.
Take care.
Take good care. Bye, Miles. Okay, that was our beautiful interview with Dr. Miles Nichols. Thanks so much. We'll be talking with you soon. Look for the comments thread below. All right. Bye now.